I'm going to talk to you about the silent sacrifice. So for this, we need to know certain words. There is mining activities when we took out minerals from the ground. At the same time, we're going to talk about indigenous communities that are different from the ones that we have in Canada. If you have heard the movements of indigenous peoples here, it's a little bit different how it works in Mexico. All right, in Mexico, indigenous people were not mass murdered. Um, as in Canada, they were usually enslaved, and later on they had an independence. So in Mexico, indigenous people also count as Mexicans in general. So we are all part of the community. For example, in my case, I'm 50% indigenous in that case. So today, this is how the presentation is going to be. It's only, I know 6 parts, seems like a lot. I will keep it short. I'll try to. So first of all, this is Mexico, and I want to ask you, how many mining zones do you think there is in Mexico from 1 to 100? Or not all at once, please, guys.
What's the question?
All right, how many mining companies there is in Mexico? 100. We have 100, okay?
90.
9, okay? 90? Oh, sorry, 90? Perfect. So in total, we have 66 mining zones. But each mining zone has 5 different companies working on them. So we have a lot of mining companies, but you only have 66 mining zones. Now, from this, 89% is related to Canada. Either Canada are the owners or the CEOs, or there's a special relationship with Canada and Mexico in terms of mining. But what we need to notice here is that Mexico is one of the countries with most problems in mining zones. What does that mean by problems? Either they have pollution, either there are criminal groups in those zones, either indigenous people are being displaced. But only 58 of those cases are open, which means that there's only 58 that have certain legal procedure. One of them is from 1980, and just for today, the local community hasn't heard from the police or the authorities. They just say, okay, they just disappeared. They're not hearing us. Now, from those 58, 50% belong to Canada. They're related somehow with Canada. And the Autonomous Mexican University has found that there's over 300 cases that are unregistered. What does it mean unregistered? That they haven't gone to the authorities, to the federal or the state government to complain about this issue. But from the ones that are unregistered, 72 is related to Canada. So this is where my project comes from. We created this huge awareness campaign in indigenous communities to tell them, hey, this is what you can do in the legal matters. There is options, but most of these people live in poverty or they don't have more than elementary school. So their knowledge about law and about right procedures is always, it's usually not something that they have. It's not a tool that they have. So from this, the project starts, okay, let's empower these indigenous communities. Let's teach them what they can do to protect the resources. And that sounded fascinating until we find out that these people, when they start to do it for the legal way, they get murdered. They accidentally, magically appear killed 2 days after, 3 days after. Probably people from Latin America feel related to this because this is something that happens in Latin America very often. So now, from this, the local communities complain about the environmental impact. Now, this is important for us guys to remember that indigenous communities feel connected to the environment. It's not like environment and humans. For them, they're part of the environment, so whatever affects them will also affect the environment. So, according to Mexican laws, whenever there's a mining company that wants to enter to a mining zone, for this, I forgot to tell you this, sorry, all the mining zones have indigenous communities around 300, 400 meters distance, not even kilometers. So they're just in the mining zone. So from there, the Mexican law was like, okay, let's agree on this. We, federal government, will give the permissions to these companies, But if the local authorities say no, if the indigenous community says, I don't want mining activities, they should respect it. What's the reality? They never ask the local authorities. They just arrive there. And imagine this, a community of 1,000, 2,000 people that barely have elementary school, and then these huge companies with huge machines arrive. What are they going to do? Right? They say, hey, don't come in. They're like, well, we have the federal permission, we have the state permission, so of course we're going to come in. Now, that's the first part. There is a supposedly legal agreement that is not respected. What's the result? These Canadian companies start to kill the trees in a massive way, usually 20 or 30% more than they should, and they start to take more territory than they should. Also, whenever it's an international company, they should be according to the international environmental standards. What does that mean? That they're supposed to follow this international agreement to respect the earth, to do it with updated technology, to avoid pollution as much as possible. The reality is that they don't do that. Most of the Canadian companies that are in Mexico don't have updated technology. So since they don't have updated technology, they go to Mexico because they know they can do it there because the Mexican government just doesn't care. Simple as that. Now, of course, that caused indigenous communities to feel stress, and this is the results that we have. We have displacement, we have disease, and we have poverty. All right? This has raised to something called the resistance, when we have environmental activists, these people that fight for the rights of the people. So this is just a short list. We have over 100 registered environmental activists, and all of them have been murdered in the last 5 years. So now,
sorry, can you say that again? That was rather shocking, that last sentence.
yeah, so we have over 103 registered activists, and all of them have been murdered in the past 5 years. We don't have any of those in this list. Gone, dead, and nobody knows what happened to them. Their families usually murder as well, and the community blames, here is what we have, blames the corruption of the government for allowing these companies to enter, because the companies start to ally with the cartel. For those who doesn't know who is the cartel, it's like these people that sell drugs, and they're really, really bad people. So they start to align with the cartel to give protection to these mining companies, and there is proof of agreements between Canadian companies and the cartel, sign agreements to protect them from indigenous communities. So this is where it starts to get scary. And now, from this, there's a call for action. All right, indigenous communities then start protests, start to venerate these activists. They start to put murals in their cities, and they start to bring up the name. They created blogs and social media awareness, but it's not enough. And that's what our project is about. What we're trying to do is to direct this problem to international organizations, because we know that the problem is not Trudeau, all right? It's not the Prime Minister of Canada, all right? The problem is the government of Mexico. But at this moment, these people need international help. And this is what we provide for them. So as a matter of fact, we give them English classes, we give them legal advice, and the environmental science students have been working to clean the water, to give people that have cancer. By the way, the cancer rate has increased at least in an 89% in the last 2 years. And there's a strong relationship between cancer cases and mining companies. So that's also very scary. So they have these health services provided by environmental science. And now that I'm here in Canada, I'm working in the international part of it. So thank you so much. Do you have any questions? Oh, sorry, this thing didn't change. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Okay. I don't know what happened to the last one. So, okay. So now for this, I see, oh, you guys have so many questions. But, so, yeah.
Actually, I do have a question, because you mentioned that for the calls of action, you want to bring this to like the international stage. And I'm kind of wondering, like, what do we kind of see like being achieved like on that international stage in terms of like tangible action? Because like, let's say we bring it to like the UN or something. Like, what what can we like kind of expect them to do, if that makes sense?
Okay, for sure. Thank you so much for your question. Here, the first step when we talk about international awareness is first, we have 3 papers sent to the Prime Minister at this point explaining what Canadian companies are doing. The ones that we have the official paper when there's a certain coalition or certain union between the cartel and Canadian companies and be like, hey, look, we are not lying. This is not people creating crazy excuses. This is what we have. And from there, thankfully, we got a reply actually 2 months ago where they would say they will try to oversee those activities. And that was our first step. But also, they recommended us to take it to the International Environmental Association. So what they do there is precisely they have a project in Colombia as well that is also part of Latin America where they're trying to protect the gold mines against this. So they have already experience with that. And they told us the first step it's always to empower the indigenous community by making them international. How do we make them international? Usually removing the language barrier, that in this case is English, and try to teach them how to do it in a pacific way. Because, of course, now we have violent indigenous communities killing workers of the mines. So it has become a bloodbath at some point.
You say Canadian companies. Is there any chance specifically you can name some of those companies? Like.
Yeah, well, we prefer not to name it at the beginning of the project. But for example, one that we can definitely name it's actually called Beaver Canadian Company. So the Beaver Canadian Company is one of the largest in Mexico. It has only 3 mines here in Canada, and it's funny enough because they don't report any problem here, but they have it's 457 mines in all Latin America. In all Latin America, they have a certain type of problem. Either is pollution, either is insecurity, or either is displacement. That it means moving another community to another place because they're already there and exploding things and so on and so forth.
So it's the people who live in Mexico, they are the ones that are being displaced, and they are the ones whose lives have changed significantly.
Yeah, imagine this, guys. You live there for, I don't know, 30 years, all right? You know that your grandfather, your great-great-grandfather lived there, and then these people arrive and they're like, you have 2 options. Either you move or you stay, but we're going to explode this place, so it's on you. So of course they start to displace at that point. And usually the closest urban settlement, it's around 200 to 300 kilometers away.
And they don't have any support from the government, like the local people probably do not get any money to move.
Yeah, no, and let's say that the whole idea is supposed to create job opportunities for these indigenous people, but they're not the ones working. It's usually international workers or people from the urban areas. So that's where our problem lies. Yeah, sorry.
So this is happening aside from our own federal government. This is all at just a corporate level. This is happening.
Yeah, that's right. It's all in the corporate.
People are blaming Trudeau for all this when really it's not his fault.
Exactly. Yeah, Canada as a country is completely innocent about it. Also, return a little bit to your question. What we say is that it's not the Canadian government says, hey, go to Mexico and destroy the country, please, right? It's more than they have the opportunity to do it there rather than here, because here they have stronger regulations. But also, Canada is not even aware of that. So that's very concerning. Sorry?
So your organization, is it mostly based here at this university, or is it more like national? And is it mostly students, or is it like a mix of people?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, the project is starting in a Mexican university. So right now I'm trying to bring it at the U of A to connect it. But right now it's at Mexico, and most of the people that work in the legal matter or the environmental matter are students. So from the environmental science or from the law faculty, right? But also we have a lot of Mexicans that just decided to unite and help, and they bring food and they bring shelter for all these displaced communities. So, sorry.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the Canadians are teaching Mexico First Nation people in English. And this let me think about a bad Canadian history called the residential school. And do Canadians this time respect the First Nations cultural identities?
Yeah, for sure. I have seen there's a huge difference how Canada treats indigenous people, different from Mexico. In Mexico, it come more like a mix, right? And all Mexicans identify at some point with indigenous communities, but we didn't have residential schools. We didn't have like this 60s coup where they took the kids away. We did not have any of that. It was mostly slavery. But at some point, see, there was a mix of race. All people in Latin America at some point know that they are Spanish, yeah, but at some extent, they're also part of an indigenous community. And I saw, oh, yeah.
I had a question. What was your major of study? I'm just basically curious if mining in Alberta or the U of A, sorry, if there's a class about ethics of mining, because your content here seems to be like we want to educate and people, but we want to educate engineers, mining engineers. That's a topic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my major is law, crime, and justice, and I'm in Agustana, so there's no class related to ethical mining. I haven't seen if in the North Campus there's a similar class to it. What I have seen from the environmental science students is that they don't learn that Canada can be the bad guy in some other countries. They believe that they have strong regulations and that they protect always the environment. They're walking and they have different bins and recycle bins. So for them, it's actually unbelievable that there is a presence of Canada that is destroying a country in another place, of course.
Is there a body that oversees mining in Canada?
Yeah, there is. There's something called the Canadian International Business Association. So it's supposed to be part of the federal government, but in reality, they receive money from the companies here in Canada rather than from the federal budget, from what we have known, and that's the funny thing. The reports after we went there and talked to them, be like, hey, we want to see what you know. They have the most clean and beautiful records ever. Like we're doing everything as we are supposed to. So I don't know what you're talking about. This is what they're reporting, and there's a lot of profits and money that is lost. So that's also very interesting for them. It was very interesting. Like they're not reporting this. What happened to that money? So even the income that they report in Mexico and the one that they report to Canada, it's completely different. So at some point, they could even be committing a crime in Canada, and they can be prosecuted in Canada. And that's one part of our next steps to be like, hey, there, you have a legislation that you can prosecute it. Just take them out, please. So yeah, yeah.
Is there not advantage of having mines in Mexico? Because in Panama we had a similar situation recently, and we have to be aware also that how we gonna replace the mining? How? We
For
need
sure.
something for that. Do you have a plan for that maybe?
Oh yeah, totally. So of course, mining produces a lot of money, right? And not only for the companies, but also for the country itself. And the problem that we have seen is that the owners of that land are not receiving that profit. They're not receiving any benefits from it. But they have developed an anti-mining feeling. And we're trying to change that by telling them it's not mining that is wrong, right? It's not the activity per se, it's how they're doing it. So we need to have a stronger regulation so we can address that. But definitely we acknowledge that mines are important, and moreover, that it will affect if we just take them out, if we just kick them out, right? What we need to do is to find a way that they feel regulated, they feel observed, and with that duty to respect the laws that they have in their country. All right, it's not even about the Mexican laws anymore. It's like you have Canadian laws. You are taught to be respectful with the environment. What happened? So we have talked with a few CEOs in these companies, and they told us, well, we have the permissions, and nobody's saying to stop. So why should we stop? Because you're saying it. Like, yeah.
But are you educating, you personally, are you educating people in mining?
Yeah, for sure. We are working. Well, we have this mining university, as a matter of fact, in Mexico City. So they're going to give talks to them to even know what is happening in the corporate level, what is happening under the mines, because they don't go under the mines. They don't know what's happening. They just know that everything is getting destroyed. And we are educating them how should responsible and sustainable mining should look like. And from there, they have, right now, we have over 100 students that have graduating in ethical mining studies. So, which has been really great because now they're being supporting their community. However, funnily enough, 5 of them they started to write a legal document to try to protect their land and so on and so forth, and we found them killed 6 months ago, right? So we're seeing that that's the part that we are struggling. Okay, yeah, we give them the tools, but there's no point of giving them the tools if they're just gonna appear dead the next day. So yeah, that's why we're changing the path of education and try to enforce security for these people before even we focus on them, because we need to ensure that while we empower them, they don't get silent by cartel groups. Because this is important. I'm not saying that the CEO of this Canadian company goes and kills the people. It's the cartel. The problem is that the cartel works because of these Canadian companies, and they receive money from these companies to pay for that. So that's when it gets sad. I saw their question. Oh, yeah.
Just one final question. How do you think Trump is going to fit into this and what you're doing? Because he's looking at basically wiping all, like letting companies do whatever they want, wherever they want.
Yeah, for sure. Even as a Mexican, I can totally say I understand where this fear to the cartel that Trump says is coming from. Of course, I don't support it, but I understand where it comes from. We have seen it and I have studied it. These are dangerous groups and they are a problem. But I think Trump will impact to cover them just in the north part of the country, that is the frontier. But actually, it's really funny to even listen the Mexican president saying like, I don't know what his guy is yapping about. We are a safe country. That's not true. The criminal rates have increased in the only in 2025, which is 1 month, and in this 1 month, it has increased over a 55%. So it's crazy. We don't see Trump being helpful at all, precisely, but definitely it will change the way even Mexicans feel about the cartel, because now people are starting to support the cartel, and people are saying, well, the cartel is the only thing that will defend us against Donald Trump. Yeah. So that's where it started to get a little bit complicated.
Have you done to find to help on other countries such as Panama, because we are passing through the same situation? Maybe making the force can.
For sure. And it's funny that you mention it, because usually people talk about this Latin community, right? And they believe that Mexico is really united with all the Latin American countries, and all the Latin American countries are united with themselves and with Mexico. But that's not true, all right? As Latins, we don't know about each other until we find ourselves here. But nowadays, we are working with Colombia, we are working with Argentina as well. And our next plan is to work with Peru, with Guatemala, and with El Salvador. So there are other different countries there. And I know there's a girl from Peru. Yeah. But definitely our goal is to connect. We have emailed all these indigenous communities that we know they exist in Latin America, trying to reach them, be like, hey, it would be better if all of us communicate this. So probably Panama will be at some point one of our next steps.
Have you engaged with any of the Aboriginal groups around here, like especially in BC, where they've been fighting the forestry industry for like? Here we have the RCMP doing what your cartels.
Yeah, for sure. Not in BC though, but thanks to the university, I was able to connect with them, and they have mentioned very similar issues. Now, of course, their problem is that, at least for us, we can say it's criminal groups that are doing it. Yeah, for them, it's their police. So they have helped us a lot with the legislation, and they're the ones that help us to connect with the prime minister to let him know about what is happening right now. Yes.
I'm just curious. So, are these companies also extending to other places around the world as well? Like, how is this even more of a global issue, like outside of South America as well?
Honestly, I don't, specifically Canada, I don't know. I know there's more mining problems at some point in other parts of the world, but I know that in Latin America, Canada has a very specific role. There's even in mainstream media, you see like this meme, like, oh, when you go to Canada and you see the Rocky Mountains, and then it's like, when you come to Canada and there's literally this picture. Yeah, when Canada visits you, this is what happens. So, so yeah, you probably have seen that meme if you're from Latin America. So it's like a very Latin American problem.
If I can answer that, like I'm from Central Europe, I'm from Slovakia, and we do have Canadian companies doing mining, and there are problems with that. So
So we see a problem. Yeah.
example from that part of the
Yeah, thank you. Any other question?
I just want to add on to that. I feel like that really shows kind of like the deeper issue of like outsourcing when like global companies kind of outsource their like labor or like their production things to other countries and then they like don't respect first of all indigenous people there or like the local groups. I feel like it speaks a lot kind of relating to the themes of like sustainable development and all the goals that we try to keep in mind. So like yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to. I mean, it's not cool the problem, but it's definitely cool to see how it's not only one group struggling with that, and even though at some point we can say it's very typical from more powerful countries, rich countries, to do these kind of actions, right? But something that really strike people is that in Canada, has a completely different mindset, right? Socially, even the kids grew up with a very different mindset. So what happened? What broke those values that you grew up with about respecting the environment and going to the Rocky Mountains? You love mountains. So why are you destroying other ones that are not yours? And you're like pro-immigrant and you support immigrants, but what happened? We wouldn't have immigrants if companies like Canadian mining companies did not destroy these resources. So definitely it's a bigger social economical issue, and even though the numbers are not the numbers are not official, and it's very difficult to have official numbers because they just don't report it. So that is where it gets tricky. Yeah.
Would you say it's also a media problem? Because it just seems, I mean, we would think that we would have heard about this in the media at some point, but we never do.
Yeah, it's really funny because even in the Mexican media, there is not a lot of information, and the one that it is, it's always like, look at this crazy indigenous community protesting against against the economy, and like they just want to have their forests, and that's it. So even the Mexican media portrays indigenous people as problematic, right? They're the ones creating the problem. These innocent companies arrive here. What are you doing to them? And in, yeah, and in Canada, I did a research trying to find newspapers. I went to the archives. I have been going anywhere trying to find some piece of media that slightly mentions that, and I haven't found anything, just blog entries from Canadian environmental activists as well.
So is that part of your plan to make awareness grow or reach out to media in the Canadian Centre to maybe be able to put pressure on those Canadian companies, or what are you doing along those lines?
Yeah, thankfully with the National Autonomous of University, the University of Mexico, we have this plan to bring to Augustana campus because there's the environmental science major there, and that they will help us to teach them what is happening with Canada, what Canada does overseas. So with that, I'm planning to contact the Dr. Greg King that works in Augustana and be like, hey, is there any chance that we can put this, probably not as a course, but like a seminar, like something to educate these people and then go to the media? First, we're trying to reach the academic environment and from there move it to the media. But for that, we will need support from U of A at some point. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Are you running into any roadblocks with like dealing with the U of A administration about this? Like, I don't know if you can answer that, but like, how is dealing with the U of A administration?
Honestly, I don't know North Campus. I have heard the North Campus is way more complicated, But Agustana is a really small campus with not a lot of students. So any idea is always welcome. And they're always really nice to listen to us and like support us. And when I told them about this, my professors were like, you know what? If environmental science doesn't want to do it, I want to do it in sociology. I want to do it in psychology, which was crazy because psychology majors, it's difficult at first to see where will they fit, but definitely they do. They want to study the mental health impacts of this. So Agustana campus, I don't know if it's the same as North Campus, but they have been really helpful. So yeah.
Do you feel at all yourself like that threat, just looking at the pictures that are on there and what you're trying to achieve? It just seems like it could be dangerous.
Oh yeah, for sure. Thankfully, I always grew up in urban sites, so I never had the opportunity to actually live the problem until actually I have a picture from him. This I work with this guy closely, so. Horacio Gutierrez, he got murdered in 2020 during the pandemic, and I was working with him when it happened. And it was really scary because they told us, if you don't leave now, you are next. So students out. So that was like my closest experience that ended up being kind of scary, but definitely it is scary even to research it, to be honest. Yeah, yeah, the cartel, that's a project that I don't know how people in Mexico keep doing it. I feel safe doing it in Canada at some point, but if I were in Mexico, I wouldn't even present about this, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Miranda.
Thank you.